I think I'm on. All right.
Make sure we're all. I think, Neil, you're here, and Dino, you're over here. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So today, our topic is going to be on data exhaust. And by the end of next year, by the end of 2020, over 44 zettabytes of data will be available. So just in case you don't know what zettabytes are, let me translate that for you. That's basically 5 billion Libraries of Congress, or 4 years of high-def video is equivalent to that. So obviously, the problem isn't the plethora of data. And we see great examples of success, of value being derived. So healthcare, which is a pretty big topic, we see, for example, device manufacturers getting smart about their patients, heart patients, marrying device data with hospital data, with personal data, and helping them figure out how to do better treatment plans. That leads to less readmittance of hospitals after a heart procedure. That leads to a happier patient, longer life. You even see data providing value in things like oil and gas. So if you think of the upstream business and you think of all the equipment that's used and their goal of having that, the upstream oil pad deliver as much value as possible, data is used from the actual equipment to data from the OEMs to environmental and weather data that can be brought together to figure out how to better maintain that equipment and do so based on that data, not in an observational way. However, the challenge is that 70% of data is considered dark data. What dark data means is that it's the data that's collected through normal business functions but may not be used. And millions of dollars are being spent to try to get this value, but it isn't actually being achieved. While there are some great examples, a lot of other companies are struggling with it. So today, we want to hear firsthand from some great experts who are going to share with us what they personally have experienced in their world, in their companies with this group. So let me first introduce myself, and then I'll introduce the panel. So my name is Emily O'Halloran. I'm a part of Accenture Digital. And basically, our goal in Accenture Digital is to help companies figure out how to use digital to really drive sustainable value for those companies. So I get the chance to work across all different industries in that pursuit. So to my left, I'd like to introduce Ron Green. So Ron is from Kung Fu AI, and he's the Chief Technology Officer. And in case you don't know of Kung Fu AI, first, they're in this building. So yes. Maybe you can give them a tour afterwards.
Absolutely.
But what they do is they help companies really navigate and help them accelerate their journey on artificial intelligence. Ron brings 25 years in the software business, and he's a serial entrepreneur. He also has a master's in artificial intelligence, and he works across many, many different industries. And a fun fact about Ron is he is an avid sports photographer. So he can maybe share some of his photos after the panel.
Absolutely.
All right, then to his left, I'd like to introduce you to Neil Delakia. He is with Keller Williams, and if anybody has sold or bought a home recently, you probably know them very, very well. He's the Chief Product Officer. And so, in case you don't know Keller Williams, they are a real estate technology and franchise company. They are one of the largest in terms of agents and sales volume. And they have a couple great recognitions recently. One with Forbes in 2018, that they are the happiest company to work for, which is a great thing. I didn't know that existed, but hey, that's a good thing. And then also Fast Company recognized them as a top innovator in their category. And then last, but of course not least, I'd like to introduce you to Dino please pronounce your last name for me. Delich, thank you. He's with Meltwater, and he's the Director of Enterprise Solutions and Integration. So Meltwater is basically the eyes and ears for over 30,000 companies, providing media and competitive intelligence, and basically helping to apply artificial intelligence to identify trends and competitive insight for their customers. And so in that role, he really helps his customers figure out how to use that data in an intelligent way. And so one of his fun facts is that he basically has traveled to over 45 countries. He's lived in 7 and is a citizen in 3 of them. So
2 of them.
Two of them.
One
two
of them
of
no
them.
longer exists.
Ah, okay. So please join me in welcoming this great panel.
Thank you.
So the topic is data exhaust, and we're going to cover about 3 main themes here. The first is to try to get a good understanding of what really is the fact and fiction around data itself. And the second theme is going to be around what's the impact of all this data? Impact in terms of privacy, impact on jobs, et cetera. And then finally, since the 3 panelists have great experience in the space, we want to hear the good and the bad of what they've experienced firsthand. So those would be the topics that we'll dive into. But before we get into some of those, I thought, why don't we first talk about what data exhaust really means? A few folks have noted that South by Southwest, there's a lot of buzzword bingo going on here, so we thought let's at least describe what data exhaust is. So let me start with Neil. Neil, from your perspective, from Keller Williams, how do you describe data exhaust?
Well, as Emily mentioned, we have a fairly large agent base. So we're a realty franchise company historically. And so we've been around for about 35 years, and now we have about 180,000 agents around the world buying, selling homes on behalf of clients or helping them buy, sell homes. Their day-to-day interactions when a client of theirs is going through a buy journey or a sell journey or even a home ownership journey throws off data. It throws off data in an offer made to purchase a home that is declined or an offer made that is accepted. What are the parameters in that offer? What gets registered with everyone is, oh, a house was sold. And we think in terms of sides. There are 1.2 million sides that we see, either sell side or buy side, in our ecosystem. And if you think about each one of those being an offer for a sell went through, that's one data point we have. We have a great history of all those data points. But what fell on the floor and blew away as exhaust was, what are all the offers and what constituted those offers that were declined and why were they declined? If you can make sense of that information, the next time you write an offer, next time an agent of ours is advising a client of theirs and writing an offer, they become that much more intelligent because they know of all the offers that didn't get accepted and potentially why they weren't accepted so that you can craft a better offer. And that's one example. Day to day, in every activity, whether a client asks a question of an agent, just recording what that question was and what the answer was could be useful going forward. And so all these types of little micro interactions or even macro interactions that happen that don't get recorded, we think of that as data exhaust.
Awesome. So Ron, you get to work across a number of different industries. I think you work with Keller Williams, but you get to see it all. Anything you'd add to that definition?
Yeah, a couple things. I like the idea of capturing the offers that were turned down. Historically, that's an example of information that just fell on the floor, like Neil said. And with the new tools and techniques we have now, if you capture that information, essentially you want to try to capture everything, even things that you think may not be important in the short term. In the long term, that can be gold. And that's a perfect example where Keller Williams is now going back and unlocking literally decades of latent value by accessing that information. The other thing I wanted to say is that I think that there's a misconception with a lot of folks that only the big players, like you have to be a Google or you have to be an Amazon and you have to have access to all the world's data to really be competitive or take advantage of the real advances that have happened in machine learning and AI. And that's really not the case. And Keller Williams is another example. They are, I think, positioned maybe to be the world leader in real estate based upon the data they have access to. And that is a unique competitive advantage. And I think most businesses out there have that advantage in their own data set if they just look at it correctly.
So that's a good comment. You know, a lot of companies, we talked about dark data, they have this data, but it's not always easy to get to. And we recently conducted a study. One of the biggest challenges to getting to that value is being able to take multiple data sets and bring it together. And so there's a lot of promise, and I think intellectually people can see that bringing data sets together can provide value, but it's not always so easy. So Dino, can you talk a little bit about why is it so hard for companies to actually get insight out of their data? And I think with your experience, you're helping to navigate a lot of the third-party information that's out there, a lot of the social media data that people often question, is that really valuable? You're helping to navigate some of that.
Yeah, I mean, our company is built on collecting external data, not so much internal data. And so back from 2001, we made a big bet on tracking online news, and since then social media has emerged. And so our business has always been collecting all the data that you guys create, the tweets and the articles and the blog posts and whatnot. And what Ron mentioned, the difficulty really is it's not collecting the data. People are getting, Keller Williams has been doing it for decades, collecting the data, but it's connecting the data, turning it into gold. And our belief and our what our company has been specializing in is taking external data and connecting it with the internal. That helps give it insight. So for example, answering the question, why are people more likely to turn down this offer or that offer? And it takes a little bit of connecting the dots, but what we specialize in is trying to extract, is there something going on in the media, in social media, or any other publicly available external data points that we can overlay on top of this internal data to help try to make sense of it. What's driving traffic to our website, things like that.
Makes sense. So Neil, we've talked about your use case, right, taking offer data. And it seems very logical, and probably not for your organization, it's kind of a well-understood goal. But was it always that obvious from the beginning? I find when I'm working with companies, a hard part of it is the human side of it, to get people to trust the data, to get people to provide the data, because sometimes people are proprietary with their information.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about your journey and some of the challenges you may have had to kind of get to what is a great path forward?
Absolutely. The hard part for us was not any shortage of ideas of what we wanted to do with the data. We had a pretty good idea of the data, first-party data that we owned, that came through us just through franchise reconciliation with our different brokerages and their agents. So we saw through our back-end ERP system quite a bit of transactional information. And then we see other information, first-party information that we capture of activity of consumers on websites, consumers raising their hand saying, I want to buy a house, I want to sell a house. We have all that information. The hard part for us was, how do we prioritize getting the data ready, the combination of data? Is you can pay a lot of people, to get your data ready for you, but how do you figure out the priority of the data that you want to get ready? And I called it, just for shorthand, what do we need to get AI ready so that we can start applying some of the AI outcomes that we want to have to this data? So it was a big problem for us of, we had folks coming to talk to us about, hey, we can solve this unique problem for you or this discrete problem for you given X, Y, and Z data. But if we invested in that, did we get any leverage out of some of the other outcomes? And we literally had a list 50 items long that said, we want to do all these things. And so for us, organizationally, it was, how do we get the most out of our data investment of getting this data source AI ready, then this data source and this data source? Because if I did these three, I could get 6 AI outcomes out of this versus just doing a straight line across of these 2 gets me 1. And so we created a grid where we said, all right, well, here are all our data sources. Here's the data that we could buy. Here are all the outcomes we want to have. Let's prioritize the outcomes and the related data, and that gave us a prioritized list of data to get AI ready or to go purchase. And then kind of a side thing that happens when you're trying to align your data and get it ready is, well, for the third-party data you want to purchase, what's it worth to you in terms of when you go buy data right now? The data vendors, third-party data vendors, they're just making up numbers. No one really knows what the data is, how valuable it is, especially in the world of leveraging data in AI. They're going to want to walk a value-based sales model, which says, well, how are you going to use this data, and are you going to combine it with something else, and then what is that outcome going to get you, and is that going to help you sell more houses or something like that? We want a piece of that. And we're like, no, you can't have a piece of that. Here's what we value the data at because it's going to help us power 3 outcomes, and therefore we'll give you this much for it or we'll go to somebody else. And so that helped us prioritize internal staff of getting data ready, my biz dev folks on going to acquire data in that priority and putting a value on it. And then it allowed us to partner with folks like Kung Fu to say, okay, let's go tackle these 3 projects first because we've got the back end getting ready for you.
That's great. That's very helpful. So Dino, you know, the whole discussion about data and ideas, it sort of reminds me, you know, what comes first, chicken or the egg? So is it the looking at the data that helps people come up with ideas, or is it the nugget of an idea that makes people think, well, do I have the data, whether it's first party or third party, to make it happen? Or is it a combination of the two? What do you find?
Well, in our experience, it's usually it's never one or the other. It's always a combination of the two, because inherently in the world that we live in with external data, once you find out that your competitor's up to something, it spurs you into action, whether you like it or not. You know, we're all competitive in nature, especially in the corporate world, and so we find a lot of clients coming to us and asking for more data or for more reports and insights and information that we can provide them. That was typically spurred by a particular event, that, you know, something had happened with their competitor or some negative information about their company. But then once we provide them that data or those insights and the initial download, if you want to call it that, there's a whole flurry of follow-up questions that come along, and then, you know, it snowballs from there. And so I don't really have a good answer whether it's the chicken or the egg, but I know one leads to the other.
Okay. So when we talk about data, obviously artificial intelligence is often a topic that is discussed, and you start to think about the implications of all this data. Discussions about privacy, this concept of black box, and what black box means is that basically algorithms that are made available and kind of spit out answers. How do you know what went into making that happen? What data was it trained on, et cetera? You know, there's always this fear of the black box of what really led to this outcome. Discussions about will AI or the access of all this data help create jobs or replace jobs. You know, there's a lot of debate around data and artificial intelligence. So let's talk about that a little bit. And let's start with the meaty topic of privacy. So Ron,
Oh boy.
Yes, tell us and share with us your wisdom about this challenge of privacy. And you know, in your role helping clients accelerate their journey on artificial intelligence, I'm sure they have to ask you, where's this line that I should draw? And is there, you know, a textbook answer to how I should think about privacy? What's your thought on this topic?
Okay, so this is a big topic. There are lots of areas here. I think the way we think about it is in sort of there's two camps, there's two areas. One is there is the privacy issue. What data do you access? How do you access that data? What do you do with it? Do you keep it anonymous? And then separately, there's sort of the functional area. What techniques, what applications are you going to use that data for? And so taking those kind of each in turn, on the privacy side, we always recommend being as explicit as possible. You have to get explicit opt-in, and you have to be clear about anything that a user may be providing to you. What's interesting there is that there are some really interesting techniques, some progress that's been made around keeping data anonymous, but still being able to be used really powerfully in models. There are a couple of techniques, and these are relatively new. There's something called federated learning, where you can actually keep the information. Let's say, as an example, like hospital healthcare records. You actually keep the records at the individual hospitals, and you train models on premise in a secure environment, and then those models are then transferred up and centralized and then ensembled, which is a technique that allows you to essentially use multiple models to make predictions. And the power of that technique is that you never see the original data, you have no access to it, and the models themselves cannot be reverse engineered, right? It's sort of a one-way data flow. The downside is it can make the models a little more brittle, but it's a pretty powerful technique, and there are some other techniques in that area as well. So I think you just have to be explicit, and you have to be careful, and you have to want to take advantage of those types of techniques. On the usage front, I think that's where it's particularly difficult, because we all want the benefit, right? We all want the benefit that we get out of these models that are created from giant data sets, like sticking with medicine, predictive medical reports, right? But I would like my information to remain as private as possible, right? So it's a
You want
kind
to
of
learn from everybody else. But
everybody
yours,
else
you
give the
want- right.
data, keep mine separate, but I would like to benefit from that.
You're like an Andy Baxter.
Exactly, exactly. And so it's tough. So I don't think there's a simple answer here whatsoever. And we haven't even gotten to the issues of if you have models and they're making predictions and you're not being careful, there may be inherent bias in that. And if you deploy models that are making decisions and you have no human in the loop, you have no way to introspect them or look for exceptions, that's a pretty slippery path as well. So I think that fundamentally we're in the very early stages of trying to figure this out collectively.
Okay, thank you. And so, Neil, the topic of jobs. This is always an interesting topic about, will artificial intelligence create jobs or eliminate jobs? And I actually saw a report that showed which jobs were in jeopardy of being lost because of artificial intelligence. I think, folks that work in banks, I think maybe even real estate agents was on that list. What's your, when you hear that, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I think we're unique. When banks rolled out ATMs, yeah, some tellers lost jobs because the ATM took over the role of the mundane, check my balance, make a quick deposit, get some money. And that was a quick self-service thing that could happen, and technology replaced some roles of doing that. However, the bigger transactions you have at a bank, I need to get a loan, all of those still have a human in the loop. And for real estate agents, we're talking about typically the largest purchase or sale in someone's life. You're going through and you've got a lot of different parameters when you're selling a home or you're buying a home that you just can't point and click your way through. Even if you had the complete AI guide you through it, Siri guided you through, hey, this is the perfect house for you, go get this loan and it's the perfect rate for you, and go move in a week, close over here. Siri did all that for you, or Google Assistant, wherever everybody's from. Did all that for you, would you trust it? Would you want to actually buy a home that way, where you just point, click, and buy a home? We feel that's not going to happen. We feel that humans are always going to be in the loop of these large-style purchases, complex purchases, or sales. Only their role is going to change. The trusted advisor role moves from being an in-person handhold the entire journey to potentially a trusted advisor on the other side of a screen, an occasional meeting, and meet me at the close, or meet me at the virtual close. And what we're working on with all the AI, that the outcomes I mentioned before, is how to empower consumers to help themselves, to get the answers they want by themselves. But when they can't find the answer, or don't know what the Google search terms are, have an expert back there that's equipped to answer the question. And a lot of what we're also doing is, for the agents, creating decision support, predictive model tools, so they know, back to the offers and why we're collecting all those offers, when someone wants to write an offer on a particular home in a particular market, the agent can say, hey, the offer that we've built together maybe has a 30% chance of being accepted if we tweak these 4 parameters, and it's not a material change for you, we move to a 90% chance of being accepted. Can we do this? All of a sudden, that agent became a trusted advisor and actually added more value into the cycle. And if Siri recommended changing those parameters, Siri may not be able to say why we want to change those parameters. An agent will, through experience, be able to tell that story. So the role of the agent changes. We feel that they don't go away. They just change what they're doing, and the tools they need change as well.
To support them. Okay. So the topic of black box. So Dina, with your company, and just even more broadly, what responsibility do you believe companies have to explain what's behind the results, or behind the black box? And what's your thoughts on auditing? And that's been a hot topic around allowing for an audit to be done to basically understand how algorithms may be working.
Well, I'll give you an example of a question that we face all the time, where people talk about the AI and machine learning that we use in our technology being a black box and they want to figure it out. It's usually around sentiment. Hottest topic is how to gauge how people feel about my brand or my latest campaign or what my CEO said yesterday or what we're talking about on this panel. And sentiment's been difficult because people want someone to just crunch through all the data and provide them one figure, one metric, and say positive, negative, neutral, or weight it. But then they turn around and say, well, why is it that way? And it's a continuous loop, if you will. You keep going back and forth. And we've actually been, we've realized that with all the data that we've been collecting, that the solution to giving people accurate insights is AI and machine learning to exactly and more granularly decipher it. And so people are only really satisfied when they see the actual end data points. So you can explain to them how the model works, but the way that I believe the human mind operates is you need to see those tangible examples. And so, we've worked with telecommunications companies, we work with e-commerce giants like eBay, and telling them about how people feel about them versus Amazon is difficult because they've got hundreds of people pushing out information, press releases, social media engagements, customer service, so everything that they do, and they try to measure that with all this information that's out there. So how they crunch through it is through an accurate sentiment model that's customized to their particular scenario. But even then, you still have to actually present them with those finer data points. And I find that's the only way to get past that black box conundrum where people just don't trust the data.
The information they're given.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about your best or worst experience with data, and what did you learn from it? Something that kind of surprised you. Maybe you had a different thought going into it than what it resulted in. So why don't we start with you, Ron?
I'm always surprised every time you go in with an idea of what you think the data will be like, or how hard or easy the project will be, and there are always surprises. I would say probably the biggest surprise I've ever had from a data perspective is we were working with one client that only once we were into the project a little bit did it become clear that they had essentially been throwing away data that was critical to the success of the undertaking. Yeah, and so that was a little bit of a shock. And so
on purpose, or was it?
Yeah, it was just a side
By
effect of
omission?
some of their some of their infrastructure. And we sometimes say, very much like the ancient proverb, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And so you never want to find out that you should have been collecting data that you weren't. But the sooner you can find that out, the better. So even in engagements like that, there is an upside, right? Because you can stop that process, begin collecting it, and that's typically coupled with identifying other gaps that you may have, right? And you can very frequently broker external data to augment some data set you have and make it 2, 3, 4 times as more powerful.
Okay, awesome. Neil, you want to share your perspective?
Less theoretical. One of the things that we're working on is, from a consumer perspective, creating what we call a home DNA, a profile of a consumer in their likes and preferences, so that we can create a better match between themselves and a prospective home. So rather than doing just a filter-based search, a search based upon where they, a particular area they want to be in, but then looking at all the attributes of that, a set of homes for sale in that area, and matching them with a lifestyle or what we've gleaned and learned about an individual. And so that's easy enough to do, but the harder problem is when you have co-buyers, husband and wife pair, and you have two different home DNA fingerprints of what they care about, and trying to put them together, because a lot of times we figured out they don't match. And so you have to, that became a whole nother problem of how do you get two
Marriage
fingerprints.
counseling?
There you go, two fingerprints together, and then show them a list of homes that they would both like, because what's happening right now is if you take the union, neither one of them is going to see an ordered list of homes that they like, right? It's going to
That's
be out of order
wonderful.
for one or the other. So that was a surprise
great.
that was more acute than I thought it would be.
Yeah, that's a good example. Dina, how about you?
I would say my most, and this isn't like a life or death, critical scenario, but the most jaw-dropping moment that I can remember recently was talking with a client who was explaining to us how they used to measure the impact of various campaigns, and they collected so much data. It was a global confectionery company. And when we're sitting in the meeting, they were walking us through, okay, we have a vendor and they provide us this data and they track all of our tweets and everything someone says. And, you know, imagine confectionery, right? They might launch a new flavor or change the color or make the M&Ms bigger or something like that. And then all of a sudden there's a lot of social media conversation around it. And they explained to us that the way that they would, and you guys will probably attest to this, people are obsessed with trying to standardize numbers, right? What's 1 million followers versus 100 followers? And of course we know that. But what is the impact of someone with 1 million followers tweeting about you and getting 5 retweets versus someone with 100 followers getting, you know, going viral? And so trying to standardize all this and come up with an aggregate figure, what they were doing was placing just a standard number for a value of every tweet. And my jaw dropped in the meeting thinking that you make chocolates that are sold all around the world. And it doesn't matter if Donald Trump tweets about you,
Right.
or if, you know, my son tweets about you.
They were treating it the same.
Treating it the same value. And to me,
Wow.
that is, I think,
So you had to have that tough love conversation.
I waited a little bit.
It was the second meeting,
Yeah,
not the first
exactly.
meeting. Okay. I love it. Well, so we're going to open up to folks. This is a great venue, actually, to ask questions. But one last question before we turn it over to the audience. When you look at how far companies become, this is such a hot topic. We were talking before the panel about how artificial intelligence is like the hot topic of the conference. World Economic Forum, same thing. CES, same thing. When you really look, whether it's your own company or the companies you work for, do you think companies get it? Are they really pushing the needle? Are they really embracing it? Or are they just kind of going through the motion because that's what everybody is doing? What's your perspective?
Well, we get to work with a lot of companies. Some, like Keller Williams, get it. I mean, they're all in. They are pushing. They're pushing the envelope on many fronts and using, you know, not just one type of technique, lots of different techniques.
Because it makes companies uncomfortable, right? I mean, that's part of this journey.
It does. You know, we were in a conversation one time with a company, very large company, that had a team of data scientists, and they were very skeptical. You know, even the data scientists, who I very experienced with traditional statistical techniques, they kind of felt like, there's nothing really here new to learn, which was really kind of surprising. I would say in general, companies are either all in or curious. We rarely have any conversations where it's like that, where they're not that interested.
Okay.
And I would also say one thing, which is I'm actually very surprised the extent to which when we talk to people, even for the first time, if they're trying to do their first initiative in AI and machine learning, they generally have a pretty good sense of what might be accomplishable given the state of the art right now, which is pretty impressive.
Pretty impressive. Great.
Yeah.
So Neil, obviously you get it. Has it always been that way, or has this self-discovery of Keller Williams come on recently?
Well, we were lucky in that we're privately held, and our majority owner, he gets it, and therefore there wasn't a funding question and of like, hey, can we, you know, what's the ROI of doing AI? From the top down, we had a benefactor that said, I believe in it, and therefore he funded it. So that's what
awesome.
that allowed us to go forward really, really fast. But what I did learn in this journey, in just getting started, because it was like, he was like, go do it, here's some money. And so we started doing it.
Music to your ears.
You're right, yes. But the hard part was figuring out how to get started. We had a bunch of folks come in, do pitches, and they were always about discovery and point projects, but we had a big agenda we needed to solve for. And so I would go to other folks trying to start off and figure stuff out. And what I learned is it was not just I'm all in and I get it, or I'm skeptical. I found a middle ground of companies, of folks I was trying to talk to, my peer group, that think of AI as like vitamins. It's like, I need me some. I'm not sure what it's going to do for me, but it's a good idea to have some AI. And
I'm going to use the term a lot, even though I'm not exactly sure what it means.
And so I found a great number of folks are just popping AI like vitamins. I'm not sure what it's for, but so long as they got a bottle of it in their company,
All right, they're feeling good,
you know?
feeling healthy.
So how did you guys get beyond that hype, especially when you're talking to a lot of vendors and companies? Because I find right now, like you said, it's like vitamins. It's like social media was 5 years ago. It's like any diet. You know, people hear about it. Oh, everyone's doing it. I've got to be doing it.
Right.
And then, especially when you've been given a budget and you go all in, and now you've kind of opened the floodgates to everyone to sell to you the concept of how do we do it. I imagine there's just a lot of hype that you have to sift through and try to figure out what actually works and what should I be investing, because it's a heavy lift, right?
It is a heavy lift. Yes, it is. It actually started with that grid I mentioned earlier. We went through and said, okay, what are all the outcomes that we know about that we want to have right now and into the future? And so we did an offsite with my team, and we just listed out every single outcome that we could think of. And then we backtracked to say, okay, what are all the ML models? And we did it with my data scientist team as well. What are all the ML models that would be needed for each of these outcomes? Which of those ML models stack together to actually create an outcome? And then for each ML model, what was the data required or data sources required for each model? And then we went through and said, all right, from a business standpoint, let's sort order the outcomes that move the needle for our business. And then that sorted the ML models we had to create, and that sorted all the data sources we had to either acquire or get AI ready on our team. And so that gave us the starting point of what was the most important thing to do from an outcome perspective, and then that moved the needle for our business. And then it allowed me to also organize a little bit more internally, was we had to do an internal organizational shift of, because I had a data scientist team, I had a BI team, and I had a data team. And they were service desks, I need a new data streams. Data team picked up a ticket and created that. BI team, I need a new report, so they would pick up that ticket and do that. So the other challenge was internally organizing ourselves so that along with that chart, we had a departmental workflow where we had, okay, data team, every time you do some sort of work, you're advancing the AI initiatives. BI team, anytime you do some sort of work, you're advancing the ball forward on all of our AI initiatives. And then around that engine, we created our application engineers and back-end engineers to consume all this. And it sounds a whole lot more sophisticated than it is, and we're still on that journey, but that's the vision we have internally for how we're going to do this. But just taking that leap of organizing ourselves, both organizationally and objectively, helped us figure out, okay, let's go invest in these three things first, and then we know that these next three are in the hopper.
That's a very helpful framework. Okay, awesome. We want to hear from you. Steve has the microphone box.
Really fun looking microphone.
Yes.
So.
We got a question there in the back.
Hi. The ML project framework, that sounds incredible. It sounds it sounds ideal. I know that building out those applications are messy and they fail, or you might arrive at a perishable model. Mm-hmm. And so, it's not exactly the rigidity, but the organization. I mean, how do you accommodate for failure when you're I mean, it sounds like you got the perfect plan and you're building out the deployment of the model, but you're doing all that before you really know if it's going to work.
That's a good question. Quite honestly, we didn't factor in that it's not going to work.
Failure is not an option.
Yeah,
No
it's
room
not
for
an option
failure.
for us. So the way we think about it is it's an ongoing process. If the first way or method of accomplishing a goal didn't work out, we just apply another way and try again. And we've created a delivery and development process that accommodates that. And so for every step of our way, we have continual user feedback, end user feedback, and we're testing constantly throughout the, we call it hyper agile. And we applied that to the delivery of our AI outcomes as well. And so we're constantly testing everything along the way. So we know when we're going to fail fairly early in the cycle so we can change course.
Collecting more data about collecting data.
There you go, yes.
More questions? We have one over here.
How's it going? This is really cool. I have a question a little bit about the decision process you go through when deciding, you find out data is not being used, right? So either that was intentional in the past, you decided it wasn't important, or you realize, all right, we didn't recognize we weren't using this data. How do you go about making a decision, this data is important now because we weren't using it, and it's important to help us reach X or Y outcome? Kind of what is that decision process like? Because there may have been decisions prior to that made of why you weren't using it.
Ron, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. You know, part of it is that you couldn't use the data before, right? So for example, if you had data locked up in PDFs or something like that, it would just be cost prohibitive to extract it. Additionally, maybe you had complete access to the data, but the modeling techniques weren't sophisticated enough. And I always like to make sure that, like, when I'm talking about AI machine learning, the fundamental concept there is you are using examples to train your model. And the reason you're using examples as input is you don't know specifically what the logic is that it needs to follow. And it's really only within, you know, the last 10 years that we've had the computational capability and the modeling capability to attack a lot of data sets that have been out there. And I would argue that you can use common sense. I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in pretty much every company out there right now where they have data they know is valuable, but they haven't known how to attack the problem to date. And we finally now have the tools and techniques to do that.
Hey, this is really cool. Sure. So my question goes back on the privacy side of it. And I work for a company that collects like dozens of petabytes of location data and like 65 million smartphones worldwide. It's a lot of data. And then you've mentioned that, you know, collect as much data as you can because you never know how this could be valuable in the future. But you've also mentioned that when it comes to privacy, you have to be as transparent as possible and let your users know what you're using that data for. And those approaches, they seem to be conflicting to me. So how do you solve this?
I think that might be to you, Ron.
Yeah, sure,
You're the
sure.
privacy guy.
Well, so, you know, I think that from a explicit consent perspective, you can't predict the future. So I think, you know, kind of in your question there was, how do I get people to opt in for data use for something that I don't even know I'm going to do down the line, right? So what you have to do there is you have to structure the agreement such that you're not specific about the use of the data in necessarily really fine detail, but you are clear if you're going to use personally identifying information to make decisions or to make recommendations, or there are broad areas of functionality that you think you may use it for, then you have to be explicit with that up front. Just in the same way that if you thought down the line you were going to sell the data, you would have to be upfront about that, even if you never did. And so I think that that is really the best way to open and honestly approach that, because we don't know what the future holds.
I would say, I think people are always generally curious about, well, who is this going to benefit? Mm-hmm. And you kind of have to, I feel like, you have to close the loop and say the person that's providing the data has to get some sort of benefit from it, like you're talking about in the medical space. Because if it's just for drug companies to, you know, better exploit their pricing strategies, nobody wants to give up their data and be part of that ecosystem. But if it legitimately helps people, you know, identify the right drugs, the right medical approaches, or even with social media, look at Netflix, for example. How much data does Netflix collect about us and what we're watching and what we want to watch? And they turn that into hopefully something more valuable, which is better programming and things that we would like to watch. And then you look at other companies that have gotten themselves in trouble by benefiting for themselves by selling the data to other people that then benefit in many other ways. And that's typically where I think people have gotten upset. So I think it's a great point that you made about being explicit with what information you're collecting, how you're securely storing it, and how you intend to benefit from it as a company, but also how you intend for people to benefit. Because people will forgive you for collecting a lot of information. I mean, there have been plenty of cases where people still willingly leave their location information on their mobile phones turned on, even though how many articles have there been written about, how that can be exploited. And I think the reason why people do that is because they understand that there is some benefit to it, like even email marketing campaigns. People will provide a lot of information to their insurance company because they know that then it gives them a better service, because then they're going to stop bombarding you with the same message month after month. They're going to time their messages at the right possible time. So I feel like in my experience, people will be happy to provide you the data as long as you are explicit about the benefits for them and whoever else it benefits.
Right.
Part of the challenge, I think, is the whole concept of dual use. So for example, I'll use your company as an example. You may provide the candy company with insight about their competition, but what actions they take and how they use that data, you can't necessarily control. So you might have been explicit about when you were gathering that data, how you and your company intended to use it, but then your customers, how they use it, and on and on and on. I think that's where it gets very challenging, is that the party that initially collects it may not have control over the next ring and the next ring of how that information.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we do ask a lot of those questions that Neil said that he didn't necessarily appreciate, right? Which is, how are you going to use this data? And
Right.
we have to protect ourselves as a company, because a
That's
lot of our
interesting.
conversations are around, well, how do you intend to connect all of these social media conversations? Because nobody wants to have another scenario where people really exploit that and then, manipulate people's perceptions in a devious, mischievous way.
Interesting. So that's part of your process with your
Oh, absolutely.
customers and clients, is understanding how they're going to use it.
Not only for privacy, but also for value. Like,
Right.
I need to know
That's
the
the part I
context.
don't like. Is
Well, for the pricing, I get it for the pricing, but it's also if we understand the context of what problem you're trying to solve, then we can be much more proactive in saying, well, here's what else you can use, and here is other layers that you can add to it. It's like shopping for ingredients. If your butcher knows what meal you're trying to make, he can make recommendations for the different ingredients that you might want to include. And so it's not always about jacking up the price and saying, I want to be a part of the value chain all the way to the end. It's more of a better understanding, because these days business models are all software as a service. We want to get you guys to keep working with us on an ongoing basis. So it's not just a one-time, here's the data, give us our money, good luck, don't get into trouble. It's more, how can we continue to work together and help you achieve whatever the mission is. And I mean, the real estate industry, there's so much disruption going on.
Absolutely.
And so there's data that can connect with the offers to buy and sell. And then there's also data on what are the competitors up to. And there's many ways that someone can also misuse that information if they have access to too much of it. So we're very sensitive to that.
Any other questions?
So you mentioned that a lot of clients, or in your case, your sponsor, they know what can be accomplished and they're quite, knowledgeable. But when that happens, what also happens is that people think that, when we get into a project, we have this bad computer that is going to do this thing very quickly, and then, it sounds like CSI, and click, 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 and then the information, and it doesn't work like that. So, and even when you're upfront about it, so can you guys do this in a week? No, because blah, 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 blah. Okay, so a week. No, because, we need to build the data, so a week. It doesn't matter how upfront you are, they always stay on like, yeah, but the bad computer. So how do you guys actually manage for too much knowledge that is not enough knowledge?
Manage those
Yeah.
internal
Yeah.
expectations? Would any one of you prefer to answer that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Great.
Like I said, I do think quite a few of the companies that we work with come in with a fairly well-grounded sense of what's possible. And we, of course, like everybody, have pressure to move as fast as we can. What we do to try to make sure that we can hit success, right? We want to underpromise and overdeliver. And somebody asked a question earlier about failing and how you deal with that. And we take a 3-phase approach, and this has worked really, really well. And I would recommend everybody steal this, which is AI is not traditional software development, right? It is highly data dependent. Your success or failure is tied to that data. Unlike traditional software engineering application development, you can do it. It's really just a question of time and money. In AI and ML, you may not be able to succeed because you're dealing with the constraints of the data. So we always do data assessment and analysis up front as a independent, separate phase. And then only once that is complete, we use that to inform the next phase, which is really more like research prototyping. And then you can look at different types of algorithms, different types of models. You can do feature engineering. And we can accomplish those 2 phases typically within about a month. And at that point, we have a fast fail checkpoint. We either know this just isn't going to be possible, right? The techniques aren't there, the data's not there, whatever it may be. Once you get past that point, then you have a really, really good sense of what steps you need to take next to complete a proof of concept, and that can typically take another month or 2. But you've de-risked it at that point, and that's the really important part of this process. So I would say, to you specifically on how to communicate that, people have to understand that this is not traditional software development. There is a little bit more of a research element to this. There's some risk. Just be upfront about that and incorporate it into your timeline, and then provide constant updates, and you'll be fine.
Could I add on to that?
Absolutely.
So from another standpoint, everything he said, kind of 100% accurate, but the way that I've been managing expectations is we do something very small and get a small outcome done in order to prove the concept of what we're doing, and then we take that and expand it to something bigger. So we purposely tackle something that we know we can get done in a relatively short amount of time, and I get it done in a week all the time as well. But it's for us, it's been quite successful to say, let's go, figure out how to read. For us, one of the things that we're working on with Kung Fu is automatically reading contracts. So we said, let's just be able to read contracts, real estate contracts in Texas. So you send an email of a contract to a service that we developed, and it'll read the contract, pull out all the particulars relevant to real estate, and then we record that as future data for other analysis, but also to help the real estate agent. And so we just said, let's tackle these types just for Texas, prove that concept, and that actually bought us time with no one telling us week over week to do the rest of the United States. And so that's the way we tackled that one. Time for one more.
Okay, time for one more question.
Hi, I think this question applies most to Meltwater, but feel free if it applies to anyone else. With having so many different clients, are there ever situations where you identify like what one company has for exhaust data that they might not be monetizing can help another client, or do you usually try and keep that separate?
Well, maybe to clarify, we don't really see exhaust data for companies. That's, I guess, in the definition, data that they have created through just regular day-to-day business. Our business is all about tracking what's publicly available outside of the company's firewall, as we say. So we don't really come across too many of those scenarios where we identify something that they should be using, but in working with the client, we often provide them context about here's what's happening in the industry, here are what the trends are, and again, there's so much information that we track, so AI is very good at picking in signals from the noise. So that often then leads the client to say, oh, interesting, Meltwater's identified a trend that we weren't aware of, and then they know what internal data they might have that couples well with that. So indirectly, we might do that, but we don't have any visibility into their own internal data unless they directly share it with us. Most typically, people will be sharing like website traffic, And the bigger difficulty and challenge that we've been solving lately is connecting the dots to a huge PR campaign that got the buzz out there. And then typically on the internal side, people will have a lot of data about spikes of traffic to their website. And in the past, they've never really connected the dots, because now you can say, I know how many people read that article, and I know how many press releases I put out to get all the different coverage. And now I can connect the dots with this many people that visited my website actually read one of those stories. And so that's as far as we get with connecting internal data.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, panelists. Very helpful. I'm sure all of us are going to take away some valuable frameworks and some lessons learned, so thank you very much.
Thank you. You did great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.